first to ask our speakers a question about, first, what do they think is the key factor why these sectors, particularly women, children, and youth, are becoming highly vulnerable to climate change and disaster risks? So that would be my first question. In your opinion, what do you think makes them highly vulnerable? So anyone from our panel?
I'll go first then, should I?
Okay, Rina.
So the question is, what makes women, children, and youth vulnerable? I will probably go in terms of, it's our infrastructure. So the way that our cities, barangays, shelters, coastal communities are built, we really have to look at the way we build things. Local government units right now are trying to address this. So for example, if there's houses built by the coast, that's susceptible and vulnerable alone to storm surges. So be assured that as part of our mandate as the Climate Change Commission, we are working with all national government agencies, civil society organizations, NGOs, to try and address the way that we live. And that's why we said it's a lifestyle change. How are we living? Our houses, our livelihoods, saan siya nakaposisyon? Is it near the storm surge? Binabaha ba dyan? Dyan ba is that where, even mountains, dyan ba magkakaroon ng landslide? So again, we're trying to work with scientists also to address this issue. Speaking of things like they're working on these things called hazard maps, so probabilistic maps. So we need to look at how we live. Saan nakalagay yung evacuation center? Where are our water wells? So what makes it vulnerable is the way that we have built our infrastructure, our homes, our offices. So that's what we need to reconsider. And until that changes, paulit na mangyayari ito, hanggat hindi natin baguhin, paano tayo titira? Paano tayo maghahanap buhay?
So parang in technical terms po, no, there is this exposure, element of exposure, and at the same time sensitivity because of the way we build or construct our infrastructure right now. So other inputs? Dong?
To add to what she said, I'll talk about the youth sector, the young ones. Bukod sa malaki ang populasyon ng kabataan, it comprises 30% of our population right now. They are exposed to vulnerability because madalas sila ang nasa frontline ng disasters. Bakit? Dahil madalas hindi sila nakakasama sa proseso of planning, hindi sila nakakasama sa proseso of implementing. Yes, we provide them with the basics, but imagine, what if we include them in the process? What if we empower them more? Put them in the NDRMC, put them in the provincial disaster risk and management councils. What if we get their inputs? Mas maiintindihan natin, mas mauunawaan natin ang kanilang mga issues. Because I believe that aside from being just volunteers, the youth sector can do so much more. We just really need to empower them.
Thank you. And I think that's a good entry point for Commissioner Paul.
Our disaster reduction policy kasi is different from our adult policies. So of course we have the teenage sectors, we have our students. So I think we need to focus on the youth sector talaga kasi of course youth is our future generations. And talagang malaki yung maaambag nila sa ating disaster risk reduction kasi sila nga yung pinaka-energetic, sila yung may energy to drive mga ganitong initiatives.
And if we're not mistaken, the National Youth Commission po has been doing a considerable work in terms of mainstreaming youth concerns po on climate change and national disaster risk reduction and management issue. Now, we talk about the youth, we go to our younger generation, to the children.
Thank you, Pebbles. I would like to go back to what Mr. Dantes just said. I think it's very important that children and youth many times are not being consulted and properly included in decision-taking processes. And I think that's a key issue why our children are more vulnerable because their specific needs and vulnerabilities many times go unnoticed because they are not really given the voice to express the risks that only them can perceive. So it's really important to give them a voice. And also going back to why children are specifically vulnerable to climate change, I think it's important the exposure fact that Rina was mentioning before. So we have a very high number of children living in the most affected areas, in small islands, in urban poor communities that suffer the effects the most. So obviously, in terms of number, they're a bigger chunk of the population, and then they're suffering many health impacts in already because of air pollution and other diseases that are increasing with climate change. So those are needs that those are hazards and risks that are urgent and that needs to start being addressed already today.
Yeah, so what we're getting is there's a need to provide a platform for these sectors so that their voices can be heard as well. And is that the same with other sectors?
Well, so I think it's very important to include everyone in the conversation, but on a certain level, an individual can only say or do so much. I think policies have to be in place and enforced, so regional zoning, proper management of developments, so both private and public sector, the people who are building community developments or infrastructure in certain areas need to know, is this a geohazard? Is this in a floodplain? Is this going to be hit over and over again? And should we or should we not build here? Regardless of what the private interests and profitability might be, we need to start thinking about development in terms of lives. So taking a kind of step back and saying, should we even be in this place to begin with? Or should we allow reconstruction in certain areas when we know that the vulnerability factor will be there, ever present and increasingly?